Hello and welcome to this webinar focused on strategies we can use to intervene in our thinking from the point of view of critical thinking. I'm Linda Elder. I'm coming to you from the Foundation for Critical Thinking, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in California. Welcome to the webinar. I'm delighted to have so many of you with us today. And I see some returning faces, or I see some returning names and some new names. So welcome all. As we begin to open this discussion, I want to start by saying that all of the theory of critical thinking provides entry points for strategies for improving our reasoning. That is the fundamental purpose, or one fundamental purpose for critical thinking. And therefore, when we're studying and taking seriously any theory of critical thinking, we should be at the same time applying the theory somewhere in our lives. Now, we are focusing here on strategies that will help us become more self-actualized. And so we're focusing on the development of our own minds. Critical thinking is also helpful, of course, for determining whether someone else is reasoning well, or whether you're reading something that is well reasoned. So here we're focusing on how to apply the theory so that it manifests itself in strategies that we can then leverage to improve our own development and, again, our own self-actualizing process. And you might ask, what does she mean by self-actualized? By that, I mean that you are achieving within your capacities at the highest level that you're capable of achieving. And of course, none of us are going to fully do this in our lifetimes. We have far more capacities than we will be able to develop, because there are so many ways in which we can develop. So one thing we want to ask ourselves is, or you want to ask yourself is, well, what areas do I need to develop in? What areas of my life are problematic for me personally? Where do I run into problems? Where are my bad habits of thought? And then how can the theory of critical thinking help me intervene in those bad habits? So one basic way of thinking about this then is we have the theory of critical thinking. We must study the theory. We can't just lightly run across the theory and say, oh, that's good, I like that, that's good, I like that, and that's good, I like that. That makes sense, that's good, that's a good theory of critical thinking, I'll go with that. That we've got to go beyond that to studying the theory in earnest, and then asking, well, how am I using this theory, or how can I use this theory to improve upon my own reasoning in order to live a life that is more satisfactory to me? So a big part of this then is in knowing thyself. So I can offer, or we can offer, many strategies that you could potentially use, but you yourself must know where the problems in your thinking are. Only you can determine that. So let me give you a quick example of this. Let's say that you are, and this could be any hypothetical person, let's say that you are a passive-aggressive type person, which means that you silently go along with whatever you're asked to do, let's say in a given situation, and you may not agree with it. You probably don't agree with it, but you go along, you go along, you go along, you submit, you submit, you submit, until at some point the this doesn't work anymore, and that's so the passive side or process is no longer working, and there's a kind of explosion, or there is a getting back at the other person. That's the aggressive side. Some people have this tendency and some people don't. So you will have to figure out in the privacy of your own mind what your real problems are. And we can't look at the question of what are the strategies that help us intervene in our thinking from the point of superficiality. So we don't want some neat and tidy little strategies. We're not looking for that. We may need to go much deeper. For example, let's say that you are living with someone who is systematically putting you down, say verbally, or it could be physically. So, but let's just take verbally. The person is always telling you you're no good, you're not capable, you can't do this, you are inferior. What do you mean? Person treating you in a condescending way. And you may be here saying, well, how do I deal with this person? What are some strategies I can use for that? And the answer may be, the strategy may be removing yourself from that person's presence permanently, if you can. So the situation that is bringing out your bad habit of thinking, or the habit that you want to intervene in, is what you've got to deal directly with. And sometimes the strategy is removing yourself, disconnecting yourself. Maybe another example would be, I'm not happy in my job. I need some strategies for just handling my workplace better. Well, it may be that the workplace is toxic. And no matter what you do, no matter how rational you are, you will be toxic by implication. You will feel the toxicity by implication. There will be only so much you can do to remain sane in such a situation. The answer may be that you need to find a new work setting for yourself. So as we move through some of these strategies that I will be discussing, remember to be asking yourself, well, what is my exact situation? And how can I get underneath this problem so that it is solved once and for all, whatever that problem or whatever those problems are? So again, we have the theory of critical thinking, we have the study of that theory, and we have the application of that theory. And so if you understand any theory of critical thinking, then you have a beginning place for this process. If you are new to the theory of critical thinking, then we'll need to, as it were, begin at the beginning. So let me just lay out some of the theory of critical thinking in terms of a starting place, and we can develop some strategies from there. So the core, when we think of a core concept of critical thinking, we begin with the concept of critical thinking, as in critical reasoning, because reasoning is what we are fundamentally doing as we work our way through everyday life. And we're having to figure out whether to believe this person or that person, have this person as a roommate or that person, marry this person or that person, have this job or that job, purchase these items or these items. We're always dealing, or we are routinely dealing with problems and issues that we've got to reason through. And therefore, we need to know what is involved in reasoning. And then we need criteria for reasoning. So we have critical reasoning. What's involved in reasoning, we might ask, and what is this criteria for reasoning that we should be adhering to? This is where the tools of critical thinking come in. So we know that when we reason, there are certain elements present. We have purposes, we ask questions, we use information, we make inferences. Based on the information and the assumptions we're beginning with, connected with our concepts, all of which are couched within a point of view, and all of which leads to implications or consequences. So again, what are the elements? Purpose, question, information, inferences, concepts, point of view, assumptions, implications. Each of these elements provide, as it were, strategies for intervening in our thinking. So let us say you are in an argument with someone and you feel yourself becoming frustrated, and the other person is say you feel taunting you or giving you some or offering bait, and you are about to take the bait. You're in this very negative situation, which you know is irrational. You feel the irrationality of it, but you're not sure exactly how to avoid what is going on here. So you can use any one of the elements as an intervention tool. Step back and ask yourself, what is my purpose right now in this discussion? What is my purpose? What is this other person's purpose? Note, I said you've got to step back. That means in disengaging yourself from the discussion for the moment. And maybe that means saying, I'm not comfortable with this discussion. I've got to give this some thought. I'm stepping back from this. I'm not sure what your purpose is, and I'm not sure what my purpose is. If your purpose is to manipulate me, then I'm obviously not happy about that. If that's not your purpose, maybe I'm misreading your purpose. Maybe I'm realizing my purpose has changed from a rational purpose, which I had in the beginning, to an irrational purpose right now, which is I just want to win in this debate or in this argument. So my real purpose is just that I want to win. And this is a very common problem in especially relationships, intimate relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships, where you lose sight of your original purpose. And what you're doing is in the end just trying to get one up on the other person, score a point on the other person. And this is entirely irrational and something that we as aspiring critical thinkers should not be engaged in. So you might say, well, he just kept at me, and he just kept at me, and I just couldn't stop myself. He was just abusive, and he was doing this, or she was doing that, and she was doing this. You see, but we do in most situations have a choice. And that choice would be to say, I'm not engaging in this discussion anymore. This is not working for either one of us. So let us step back from this. So there are many moves that you can make in that situation. One is to call the other person on his or her irrationality if you think that's what is going on, that the person is irrational or illogical. And if maybe the problem is with you, maybe you're misreading what is being said to you. But by intervening and saying, let's back up from this. What is really going on here? Are you doing this, or are you doing that, or am I misreading this? And you'll find when you do that, the process stops as it was, and you have to begin again somewhere else. And if the other person, let's say, is trying to manipulate you, and you say, it feels like you're trying to manipulate me right now. Is that what's really happening? And the person says, well, of course not. I don't know what you mean by that. Or the person says, well, actually, maybe I need to rethink what I'm saying. So you give the other person a chance to correct the problem in good faith. Remember, notice the term in good faith. This is a powerful concept that we should be using much more often in everyday life. Are you acting in good faith, or are you acting in bad faith? So these are just some examples of how we can begin to use elements of reasoning to intervene in our thinking. I was there focused on simply purpose in reasoning. So what is your purpose right now? Or I can say, what are you assuming right now? What are you assuming about our relationship? What am I assuming about the relationship? How do our assumptions differ? So now I've entered it purpose, I've entered it assumptions. I can enter at any of the elements of reasoning. Of course, we need to internalize the elements of reasoning to have these tools available to us. So this is just one set of examples. Now let's go to intellectual standards for reasoning. So remember, I began with critical reasoning. So what's involved in reasoning? The 8 elements. We can intervene with in terms of any of the 8 elements. We can also intervene at the criteria for reasoning. So we have critical reasoning. What does critical mean? It means the criteria that we should be using in our reasoning every day. Why? Because these are the criteria that the most reasonable persons have used throughout history. What are some of these? Clarity, accuracy, relevance, depth, breadth, logicalness, precision, fairness, sufficiency, reasonability, justifiability. These are a few of what we term essential intellectual standards that come from a much larger constellation of intellectual standards that we use throughout human life. And as humans, we are implicitly adhering to these more or less. We want to bring these criteria to the explicit level to get more leverage from them. So let us say that, again, you're in an argument with someone and you are thinking about these standards, you've studied them a bit, you're not exactly sure how to apply them, but in this discussion where, let's say, again, a person is, let us say, trying to manipulate you or control you. So we can intervene using intellectual standards. We can say, let me see if I am clear about what you're saying. Let me say it back to you, what you are saying to, let me say back to you what you are saying to me, and you tell me if I'm accurate. Notice I'm bringing together clarity and accuracy here. So the person, in fact, is trying to control you or manipulate you. Now you are intervening with a strategy. The strategy is, I'm simply going to ask a question of clarification. This is what it seems that you are saying. Is this correct? Am I off somehow? Did I misunderstand you? Help me with this. So these are, again, some simple strategies we can use for intervention. Another one is logicalness. So if you, again, let's say you're in a disagreement with someone and it becomes heated, you can step back and say, how logical is this discussion? How logical am I being? How sensible is my behavior right now? How reasonable am I being right now? And notice I keep saying, I keep referring this to myself. How reasonable am I being? How sensible am I being? How logical am I being? Why? Because I can't control anyone else. I can only control myself. Now, when we have small children, we have some minimal amounts of power, especially as they get older. And yes, we can use that power wisely or unwisely. But for the most part, we have very little power over anyone else. What we're looking for in this discussion is power over ourselves. We can always ask, Am I being logical? Am I being fair? Do I have a sufficient amount of data about this other person that I'm engaged in discussion with to proceed here? Or do I need more information about this person? Am I seeing a new side to this person that I haven't seen before? And if so, what is this new information that I need to take into account? Now I went back to the elements of reasoning there. Do you see? Information is one of the elements of reasoning. So I want to be clear about the information. I want to make sure that my thinking and my behavior is logical, that my thinking is fair, and that is what I'm looking to command and control. So I've spent a little bit of time on the elements of reasoning. We could spend a lot more time on that, a little bit of time on intellectual standards or the criteria that critical reasoners use routinely in their reasoning, and we would need to spend a lot more time with that. So, but those are two primary conceptual sets in critical thinking. Another primary conceptual set is intellectual virtues. Now, when we have command of intellectual virtues, we know that we are aspiring to, or we attempt to aspire to these virtues. Here are some primary ones: intellectual empathy, intellectual humility, intellectual integrity, confidence in reason, fair-mindedness, intellectual perseverance, intellectual courage. So let us take any one of these. Let's take intellectual empathy. What is this? This means, first of all of the intellectual virtues are tendencies or propensities or dispositions, traits, characteristics that we are trying to build up in ourselves. We want to develop intellectual character. We want to develop the character of the fair-minded, critical person. And therefore, these virtues are central to our conception of critical thinking. So we don't want to just focus on skill sets, like the ability to clarify a thought. That's a skill or skill set. And that's a necessary condition for critical thinking. But we must go further and develop the way that we operate in the world as human beings. So again, taking intellectual empathy, what this means is that, let's say if I'm embodying this, then I have the propensity, the predisposition to reason within other people's thinking. And that includes, let's say, the thinking of an author of an essay or of a book. I want to get into that person's thinking, and I want to think that person's thoughts. You can see, or you can infer, that there are going to be problems in that process. Because in fact, you think within someone else's thoughts to the degree that you are trying to. You only think through those thoughts first through your own thoughts. In other words, you have to get to the other person's thoughts through your own mind. And this creates a, a labyrinth for trying to get to that person's thinking. And especially when you are, let's say, there's something irrational going on in your thinking. So there's something that's illogical in your thinking, and you're trying to enter that other person's point of view, but you really cannot do so because you're so locked in your own point of view that you can't hear what the other person is saying. So let's again go back to an example. Let's say you're in an argument with your partner and this is becoming heated. So now step back from that. Here's a strategy that you can use. You can say, let's try this. You argue from my point of view for 10 minutes, and I'll argue from your point of view. And the further you are into your own point of view, the more locked in you are to your own point of view, the more difficult this is going to be. That is, to be able to enter the other person's viewpoint. And so you have to, but when you make a move like this, you argue from my point of view, I'll argue from your point of view, and you say that I'll go first. And then when you're doing that, you'll realize the difficulties in the process, because you'll see your mind is constantly trying to say what you think, what you want, what's important to you, rather than setting that aside and in good faith giving the other person's argument the way that person would actually give the argument. No more and no less, no higher, no lower. So let's say that you're in an argument with someone who's a very irrational person, and you yourself are fairly rational. So you're going to start and you're going to say, I'm going to give the argument. And let's say the person is berating you, in fact. So you start with that. Why do you always do it this way? Why are you always doing that? And the person is saying, "Now I don't do that. That's not the way I say things." But it is, in fact, true what you have said. And so for this to work, both people must have some propensity to rationality, or the other person will constantly deny what you're saying and it won't work at all. Or let's say you begin and you see that as you start to say the other person's point of view, you can hear yourself misrepresenting it. And this should be a lesson for you. And you should say, maybe that's a good time to laugh at yourself and say, I realize I'm not being honest. Let me start again. And then you start again and the other person's listening, and then the other person gives your point of view. You see how this diffuses the argument. The argument basically, it doesn't take care of itself, but the process is re-guided. And the idea is to bring in all of the tools of rationality to come to a place of reasonability. So what are some strategies we can use focused on intellectual virtues? I've been discussing briefly intellectual empathy, which means that we are able to enter other viewpoints in good faith and to accurately represent them. And when we have this disposition developed in ourselves, we are routinely and regularly doing this. So I'm reading a book. If I had this predisposition, I'm reading a book and I'm saying, let me put myself in the mind of this person. Let me put myself in the mind of this person in this situation, in that situation, in this. So now I wouldn't do it exactly that way, but I can see how they did at that time in history and in terms of what was going on. Or this, I can't see how someone would do something like this because it's unethical in and of itself, no matter what the historical period. So we always focus on the context at issue. So for example, if I'm reading a book about someone who was some historic figure, and it turns out the person owned slaves. So the person does not get a pass for owning slaves. We don't say, well, lots of people believed in slavery at the time, and yes, we know it's wrong now, but they didn't know it was wrong then. The fact is, it was wrong then, it's wrong now, it's always been wrong. And so we don't look back and say, well, that we're just going to excuse the people. No, we're not going to excuse them. They always should have known better. So intellectual empathy is there to help us understand someone's point of view, but that does not mean we accept the point of view. Intellectual humility is another very important intellectual virtue. This means that we have a clear understanding of what we know and what we do not know. And we do not step across that line in terms of our the way we present ourselves. We don't say, well, I'm not really sure what I'm talking about. This is really outside of my area of expertise, but let me give it a try. Or let's go over here in this terrain that I really know nothing about, and I'll still pontificate. Now, when we embody intellectual humility, we say, I don't know anything about that. If I don't know anything about that, I'm not sure how that works. I would need to read it more on that. It's outside of my expertise. And so when we are thinking of using this as a strategy, then one of the things we have to understand is that the opposite of intellectual humility is intellectual arrogance. And all of us fall prey to intellectual arrogance, which means that we have beliefs that are not based in good reasoning, but that we are holding on to. And we are pushing those beliefs potentially onto other people. So let's say you're in a disagreement with someone and someone makes a very good point, and part of you can see that they've made a good point, but part of you does not want to see it because you want to hold on to the point that you've always believed, to the viewpoint that you've always believed in. So you are pushing your irrational beliefs onto the other person in that scenario. But you have to be able to see your intellectual arrogance. You have to see that you're locked into a narrow point of view that makes no sense in this context. And you have to be able to say to yourself, this is not accurate. This is not logical. And I need to open my mind, and I need to be willing to admit when I'm wrong. Now, this is a very important point, and it's an important problem for the human species, because we are not typically taught to be aware of our mistakes in thinking and to be willing and readily able to say, I was wrong. When I said that, I was wrong. I hadn't done my homework. I was thinking this, but actually the opposite is true. And when we had that discussion, I was exploring these possibilities, and I was stepping across the boundaries of my knowledge. I realized now. I went back, I thought about it. Some questions were raised for me. I looked up some things. I'm now much more clear. And let me tell you where the mistakes were in my thinking. This would be an example of emulating or let's say modeling intellectual humility for someone else. So all of the intellectual virtues provide entry points for our strategic thinking. Intellectual courage is another. What does this mean? It means that we have the courage primarily to look within our own belief systems and to accurately assess those belief systems. And an analogy that you may find helpful in terms of strategy is to think of your mind as a house full of rooms. And so you have within your house, within your mind, you have your professional life room or your work room. You have your maybe parenting room. You have your intimate relationships room. You may have a religion room. You may have your hobbies or the things that you do to take care of yourself emotionally and mentally, your mental health room. You may have your physical fitness room, and that may include what you eat and how you treat your body. You see, the different parts of your life would represent the rooms in your house, so to speak. And when we are embodying intellectual courage, then we're willing to go into any of those rooms and to find problems in our own belief systems. So let's say that in parenting, you're experiencing a number of problems and you keep wanting to push those off onto the children. It's the bad children. It's that they won't listen. They won't do what I say. And maybe the fundamental problem is your parenting philosophy. Maybe the problem is you need to rethink your belief systems that are driving your parenting. And the same would be true for any of these rooms. Many people have difficulty looking closely at and critiquing their religious views because they've held on to these views for a lifetime. They don't intend to critically think them through. The door is sealed on that room, and they're not willing to look at anything that they're doing or that they're thinking within that room. And to the extent that this is happening, then you're likely to be holding on to beliefs that perhaps do not make sense. So you have to be willing as a critical reasoner to enter any and every one of these rooms and to see what your actual beliefs are and how you are actually behaving within those domains of your life. So this is again, an analogy, the rooms in your house that you can burrow into. You can say, well, let me think about this. Let's see, how do I think about my professional life? What's going on in that room? How do I think about my intimate relationship? What is really going on in that room? And another part of this is that many people are controlled by their past lives, their experiences from their past, and their perceptions of those experiences, so that they think that these, let's say, my past is haunting me, my childhood is haunting me. These ideas from my childhood are constantly popping in to my mind, and I can't get rid of them. And this is where we absolutely do need to intervene. Obviously, we need to know what is bothering us. And once we figure that out, then we've got to intervene to stop this from happening. And so that when you think a thought that is you consider to be a memory from your past, you have the option to intervene right then and to say, that may or may not have happened, but how is that significant to my life right now? Am I going to let that control me, or am I going to control those memories? Am I going to, let's say, I may have some bad memories from my past. That's a room in my house and of my mind. And the fact is, I can keep that door closed and locked if I decide to. I'm not needing to remember and re-remember and re-remember and re-remember something that my parents did when I was a child that I thought was unjust and may very well have been unjust. So this is about developing the executive function of the mind so that you have command of the thoughts that are at this point popping into your mind, and you're saying, I'm not going to allow that anymore. I'm going to take my energy and do something productive with it instead. So we've talked a little bit, just briefly, about the elements of reasoning, intellectual standards, intellectual virtues, and how all of these offer processes for intervening in our reasoning and in our bad habits, and they all provide strategies for that intervention. So what is left at the core of critical thinking? the barriers to critical thinking. And we place these under the rough categories of egocentric and sociocentric thinking. So the basic idea here is that all of us are sometimes rational, sometimes we're irrational. When we're irrational, something is illogical in our thinking. Something is problematic. Something is unreasonable. And this process of irrationality can be categorized even more into either egocentric thinking and or sociocentric thinking. So both may be going on. We may be moving in and out of these, but what do I mean by these? By egocentric thinking, I do not mean something positive. I do not mean self-protection. That comes under the rational self. When I say egocentric thinking, I mean locked within a narrow viewpoint, and there's something illogical in that, and or being selfish. So I'm either looking out for something I can get for myself without being concerned with the rights and needs of others, or I'm simply locked within my point of view that I've always had. I've always believed that people that were older were basically, well, I'm not going to say that, but you can think of any irrational thought that someone may have. Someone older is just someone that we no longer value. So we just put those people out to pasture, so to speak. They're not worth our time anymore. Oh, that's just an old person. You see, that's a prejudice, a bias that we have in our culture. So that's a viewpoint that many people hold, and it's a narrow viewpoint, and it keeps them from seeing what is really beautiful and wonderful about a given person of any particular age. Or think of the way that we think of skin color, another example. So we are maybe locked into a narrow viewpoint about that, and this causes prejudices in our thinking. So egocentric thinking, again, means locked within your own belief system or set of beliefs, or being selfish. Sociocentric thinking, in parallel to egocentric thinking, means we're either locked within the group's way of thinking, or it's, in essence, group selfishness, which I term groupishness. So we humans move around between rational thinking, egocentric thinking, and sociocentric thinking. And when we understand the powerful role of egocentric and sociocentric thinking in our lives, then we have many points of intervention as critical reasoners, or those of us who are aspiring to critical reasoning. We never arrive at that point. We never become fully self-actualized, but we are committed to being fair-minded critical persons. So if I understand egocentric and sociocentric thinking, then I can say to myself, so right now, am I locked within some viewpoint that is keeping me from hearing what this person is saying? Am I being egocentric? Or am I just wanting to get more for myself right now? Or am I wanting to be validated by a group? And am I willing to give up a rational viewpoint in order to be validated? And this is a very significant problem, as we all know, in human life. This perceived need for other people to like us, to think that we're good, to think that we're worthy. And of course, it comes from the broader point that we are social animals. There's nothing wrong with that. We need these discussions. We need these interactions of the sort that we're having now. We need to connect with other humans as well as other creatures. But we need to do this in rational ways. So what are some strategies then? along these lines? Well, in terms of egocentric thinking, there is a set of distinctions that I think is very powerful. One is that whenever we are hoping to achieve something for ourselves egocentrically, so without concern for the rights of others, we do so either by dominating another person or by submitting to that person. And remember, this is all irrational. So there are some times when, of course, you go along. There are many times when it makes sense to go along with a group decision, for example. We can't all make the decision. Someone has to make it. I've said what I have to say. I feel that I've been listened to. The course that we're taking is maybe not the one I would take, but I can see why we're making it. It seems reasonable enough. So in that case, let's say that's a reasonable process. But there are many situations where that is not what is happening. And what is happening instead is someone is dominating you or you are submitting when it doesn't make sense to. And so think of the dominating ego and the submissive ego. Think of common examples. So the supervisor who is constantly putting you down and lording over you her power, or and you could have the person who, let's say a supervisor who does this at work and at home is submissive to her partner or her children. So you could be a dominator at work and a submitter at home. You may be a dominator at home and a submitter at work. So this is a very powerful set of strategies, because if you apply them, you begin to see in the workplace many examples of what I'm talking about. Begin to observe and you'll see this. So what's an intervention strategy for you? You can ask, am I submitting irrationally right now? Am I going along with this when I don't agree with it? Or am I trying to control someone else inappropriately? Am I yelling and screaming at my children because I'm tired of being dominated at work, so I come home and I treat my children this way, or I kick my dog? What is going on here? So domination and submissive behavior we want to be looking for. We see the same patterns in group behavior. Groups dominating the individual thinker. And again, we have to ask ourselves, to what degree do I fit into a society that is continually dominating me irrationally? How do I find a way to become, to self-actualize in those circumstances? And often the case is such that we cannot change the circumstances. We can only change what we do with respect to those. We can sometimes remove ourselves entirely. Sometimes we cannot do that. So we've got to ask ourselves, what can I realistically do in this situation? Another strategy for you as you are thinking of your list of strategies is stepping back then from this theory of critical thinking. We want to realize that thinking or critical thinking comes out of the cognitive functioning of the mind, but we also have the affective dimension. So we have cognition or thinking, and we have feeling or emotions as part of affect, and desires or motivation as part of affect. So we have thinking, feeling, desiring, to put this in a nutshell. And therefore, in our minds, we have these functions continually operating. We're thinking, we're feeling, we're wanting. We're thinking, we're feeling, we're wanting. What's an example? You were thinking, you read the email that we sent out, perhaps about this webinar, you thought it was important to attend this, you then behaved in a certain way, you came to this webinar. Now you've been listening to this discussion and you are now thinking something else. You are either getting more excited and now you are developing your strategies, or you are thinking, I'm not really sure. I don't really get what she's saying. I'm not really sure how I can use any of this. So you see, you're thinking something. You're always thinking something, and you're feeling something, and you're desiring something, or you're not desiring it. So you may say, well, this is interesting. This is the first time I've been, and maybe I could learn more coming to more of these. So now that's speaking to the motivational side. So as you go through life, here is a simple strategy you can use moving forward. You can ask yourself, now, in a given situation, knowing that you have thinking, feeling, and wanting going on continually, you can ask yourself, as an entry point, what is the feeling that I'm experiencing right now? Or what is the desire that I'm experiencing right now? And because though thinking, let me back up a minute, feelings and desires and thinking are, as I said, continually occurring. But we are mainly aware, are frequently aware of our feeling states, but not necessarily aware of the thinking that's causing that feeling state. And desires are connected to thinking, obviously, as well. So when you're in a situation, here's a basic strategy. You feel something, let's say you feel something negative. You have a negative reaction to something. You can stop. You can ask yourself, what is the thinking that I am doing that is causing me to have this feeling? So let me give you an example. Let's say you go, somebody invites you to a movie and you are not sure about the movie, but you want to go with your friend because your friend's invited you. So notice you're thinking about it. You're not sure whether it's a good use of your time or that you would really enjoy it. So you go to the movie because your friends asked you and you decide, okay, why not? I'll just enjoy this social experience with my friend, even if the movie is maybe not what I would want it to be. This is your thinking. So you go to the movie, but let's say as the movie progresses, you become more and more dissatisfied with it. And let's say an hour into the movie, you say to yourself, I'm not willing to watch any more of this movie. It's not a good use of my time. It has a lot of violence in it. It has a lot of irrationality in it. I'm not interested in this. So do you then tell your friend, I'm sorry, but I can't, I'm not able to watch this. I've got to go. Or do you just endure because you're there with your friend and you're embarrassed to say you don't want to be there? What is the rational thing to do? Well, it's entirely contextual. It entirely depends on the situation and how the person may react and how strongly you feel in terms of your negative reaction. But you may say, I've got to go. I can't do this anymore. So you don't always, but you often do have the choice when you're not taking advantage of that choice. So the feeling is, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't like what I'm seeing here. What's the thinking? Thinking is, I came for my friend, but now my thinking is going to change. My thinking is, I can't tolerate this anymore and I'm leaving. It's your thinking that has to come to the rescue. Your thinking has to guide you, but your feelings can tell you how the situation is going for you at the moment. It's going well or it's going poorly or somewhere in between. So these are some simple strategies that you can use. And another one that I want to mention that I've been working with recently is when you are, let's say you're in a pattern of thought that is difficult for you to intervene in. It's a bad habit. Let's say you are in, you're constantly getting embroiled in negative discussions with someone, as an example, and you want to say, or let's say you are dissatisfied with your marriage, but you don't want to get out of the marriage because there are enough benefits for you, but you feel a lot of frustration. So how do you get, as it were, in front of that problem? So you have these negative feelings. So you want this person to change, but you know that's never going to happen. So why do you keep asking the other person to change? And why do you keep doing things that to get this other person to change when that's not going to happen? So how can you get in front of that problem and head it off at the pass, so to speak? How do you say, okay, this is what's happening. It's happened before. I'm not going to change anything about this person. Certainly not going to change this. So how can I move my energy in an entirely different direction? And maybe that's distraction. Maybe that's, I'm going to go outside and work on my garden. Maybe I'm going to do some artwork right now. Maybe I'm going to do some dancing and listen to some music, but I'm not going to keep doing what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to keep thinking these negative thoughts that keep me going around and around and around in the same circle where I'm getting nowhere. So in close, and then I'll take a few of your questions. If you have any, please go ahead and start maybe typing in your questions in the Q&A box. Let me just summarize where I have been. I started with that you need a deep understanding of the elements of reasoning and intellectual standards. So criteria for reasoning, critical reasoning, and you need to understand intellectual virtues and the barriers of egocentric and sociocentric thinking. All of these are at the core of a rich and powerful conception of critical thinking. And all of these tools provide explicit means for intervening in any of your bad habits of thought. So that is a beginning place for thinking of this. And let's see, does anyone have questions? A good question, Laurie. How do I catch this in time? I'm such a pleaser that I don't know I've been treated badly until later. So this means that you are falling prey to your own submissive orientation. So in other words, a pleaser is in essence a submitter. So I'm submitting to everyone, or I'm submitting to certain people under certain conditions. That's my orientation. That's a resting place for me. And therefore, I'm not going to see necessarily that I'm being treated poorly. And the first step is to recognize it after the fact. And that's just going to happen for a while. So once you really begin to take this seriously, then you're going to see yourself doing it again and again. Well, I've already done, this is what I've always been doing. But the difference is now you see it. That's a first step. You weren't able to intervene at the time, but you do see it later, or you wouldn't even have the question. So what you want to do, obviously, is to stop yourself in the middle of this scenario and do not hesitate to say to the other person, if you can, in the circumstances, I'm sorry, I may be wrong. It seems that you are treating me badly right now. Help me understand this. Notice the move. I may be wrong. I hope I am wrong. But I just have to say this because this is how I'm feeling, and I'm needing you to respond. And so that's the second part of the process. The first one is you see it after the fact. Second part of the process, you see it while it's happening, but you may not be clear because maybe you're confused. Maybe the person is very good at manipulating and you're not even sure if you're being manipulated. That's why it's a perfectly fair statement. I'm not sure whether you're trying to manipulate me right now. I'm probably wrong. And let the person correct what he or she is doing, assuming there is a problem on the other side. And then the ideal is this person is trying to control me. And that I will not tolerate. There's a great line from a Jane Austen book, Pride and Prejudice. My courage always rises with every attempt to intimidate me. So you see that my courage always rises. So that you want to bring some of that spirit into your own life. My courage is rising. You can see there's a little bit of emotion in that. I'm having to work up this courage. I'm having to make it rise because maybe I'm not that courageous to begin with, but now you are trying to manipulate me, so it's going to rise in this situation. So then do have confidence in yourself enough to be able to say, I may be wrong, but I need to tell you this. And I think that's a strategy, Laurie, you should try. If there's any situation where you think the person may be trying to manipulate you and you're telling yourself, well, no, this isn't one of those situations. I'm sure this isn't when it's happening, but it likely is because you're already thinking it. So notice I didn't say it is, but it likely is. So therefore you've got to get in front of that. You got to say, I've got to intervene here, even if I'm wrong. And the person may say, no, you totally misread me. But maybe you didn't misread that person, but they've now changed their tune because you've called them on it. Hopefully that helps. Dominating egos we usually encounter in professional life. Yes. Should we ignore them? It depends on the circumstances. I would say everything or almost everything depends on the circumstances when it comes to critical thinking and when we are not sure. So we've got to go to the circumstances and say, well, look at exactly what is happening there and decide what our options are within that scenario. And you're right, our business model is built on dominating and submissive behavior. So the people at the top are dominating, the people at the bottom are submitting, and the people in the middle are submitting to the people on the bottom. I mean, they're dominating the people underneath them and they're submitting to the people over them that are supervising them. And so a question is, how much power do you have in that situation? Can you leave and move to a new setting, work setting? Can you get out from under all of these dominating people? Or is this just part of what you have to tolerate given your profession? So first, remember, we usually have a lot more choice than we think we have. And then when we don't have the choice, the question is, should we ignore them? Again, it entirely depends. If your supervisor can terminate you if you don't go along with certain things, then you've got to decide whether you're willing to go along with those things. And sometimes it's not ethical for you to go along with them. And sometimes it's something minor. So the person, thinking of something minor, let's say you'd like to bring pictures to work and put them out on your desk, but you're not allowed to do that. Well, does it matter to you that you have pictures on your desk? Do you really need that? It could be a ridiculous rule, and one that your supervisor is just using because the person has a huge dominating ego. I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want to see clutter. I don't want this. And it's somewhat arbitrary in that case. So you have to ask yourself, do I ignore that? Do I really need pictures at my office? Or is it something much more significant than that? So remember, look at the context, look at your choices, ask yourself what you can do in those circumstances. So I'm going to bring this to a close. I hope this has been helpful for you. And I know that many of you, again, have worked with this theory, and you can see that you should be able to see all the strategies implied by the theory. The key is to study the theory and then actually use the theory and employ it for your own self-development, while of course respecting the rights and needs of others. So thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.